You're joking, aren't you? It's the Teesside Chef. Da-da-da, I'm in Paris, and the weather might be a bit rubbish, but I'm not going to put any filters on this intro, because this isn't Instagram, and I'm not a big fat lying get. And I've come to the world-famous Rose Bakery on the Rue de Martyr to check out their legendary square quiche, an ever-changing plethora of flavours, baked fresh every day, utilising the best ingredients, and I'll be unboxing all 4 flavours what they had here later on, so stick around for that, quiche fans. But first, I'm going to be making my own quiche, inspired by my visit to the Rose Bakery, and my experience in Paris has implored me to change my quiche-based recipe, so I've gone in with 200 grams of plain flour as usual and a half a teaspoon of salt as well as a good pinch of pepper, but now I'm going to go in with a quarter of a teaspoon of baking soda. I'm not necessarily doing that to leaven the dough, although it does lighten the crisp slightly, but my main reason for doing this is to raise the pH level of this pastry to speed up the Maillard reaction and allow it to brown more easily. And if that's too scientific and serious for you, here's a picture of a dog with a pair of sunglasses on its ass. And after adding a teaspoon of dried oregano to my dry ingredients and 100 grams of room temperature butter, I'm going to blitz all that together until I have a breadcrumby type texture. And I'm giving my blender a bit of a dry slapper here just to make sure that none of the ingredients stick to the sides, but I wasn't completely successful. But it doesn't matter because I can go in now and scrape the sides down and check that there are no huge lumps of butter in here, and that looks good. So I'm going to go in with a beaten egg before blitzing slowly to incorporate. And I have often in the past put a tablespoon of vinegar in my pastry to make it more tender and to add an interesting flavour, but I'm not going to do that anymore after my visit to the Rose Bakery. Vinegar will lower the pH level in the dough and prevent it from browning like theirs did. So I've been officially converted, and they do say that travel broadens the mind. And if that's too much of a long and boring personal story for you, here's a picture of a cat that looks like Donald Trump. Now I have added a couple of splashes of milk to this now to bring it to the right texture, and I'm blitzing it very slowly here in my machine to bring it together, but you can do this pastry with your hands from scratch, I suppose. Anyway, now I'm going to give it a little knead, and it's time to roll this pastry out. So get plenty of flour on your work surface, and by plenty I don't mean as much as I've used here, because I did overdo it a little bit, like, to be fair. But there's no turning back now, so I'm just going to rip through this at breakneck speed, and I ripped through Paris at breakneck speed during my trip there, and I do have some other videos from the City of Lights, so check those out if you've got nothing better to do, because I did make several pilgrimages while I was in Paris, and if you're a bit of a food nonce like me, then there are some good tips for you in some of my videos. Anyway, now the pastry rolling is done, I'll check the size of it against my tart pan, and this is a standard size, this one, and I'll brush off all this excess flour I was too enthusiastic with earlier, before folding up my pastry into a little parcel, and folding up like this is the best way to get your pastry in the pan, I find. But if you've watched all of my videos, you'll already know that, because I've done this a ton of times on my channel, and I am a little bit sick of repeating myself, so I can only imagine how tired some of my regulars are with this. But if you're finding this bit particularly boring, here's a picture of a rabbit pushing a shopping trolley. So as you can see, I'm well along now with putting this pastry in my pan. And here is the unfolding and tidying up process. And you might notice that I didn't rest this pastry in the fridge before I did this, so it is a little trickier to get this in without breaking it. But it doesn't matter, because you can just use your hands to tidy it up, and if it breaks or rips while you're doing this, don't panic and just smash it back into place with your face slappers. And I'm just going to trim the edges here with my rolling pin and make it look all neat on the top there. And I'm going to prick it with a fork all over, but I'm not going right through the pastry here, just sort of 3/4 of the way through. And I'm resting this pastry in the freezer for 30 minutes instead of in the fridge before rolling. But as long as it chills out at some point, there won't be any issues once it bakes. And now I've saved myself some time with the resting, I can get on with the filling, and this will be my standard quiche filling for the most part, and will work for any flavour quiche you choose. And it starts with 3 large eggs, plus 1 extra yolk. And the white I'm separating out here will be used later on, so don't throw that away. We're going to brush that egg white onto the quiche base later on to seal it in before setting it in the oven, and that will ensure a nice dry crispy base. But before that we need to add 400 millilitres of double cream to these eggs now, And this is going to give our quiche a lovely creamy texture. And let's add a half a teaspoon of salt to that, along with a generous pinch of pepper and a teaspoon each of dried oregano and dried thyme. And now we want an itty bitty pinch of nutmeg. And a tablespoon of cornstarch will give us a smoother texture, but this is optional. Along with 2 tablespoons of finely grated Parmesan cheese, and this is optional as well, I suppose. And finally, a heaped teaspoon of mustard. And now let's give it all a good old mix up. And once we've finished mixing it, we can leave that in the fridge until we need it. And here comes our frozen tart base back in. And we're going to blind bake this now. And a good dry base is essential when making the best quiche. But have no fear, because I'm getting almost good at doing this now. So I've got a piece of baking paper in there, and now I'm going to go in with some dried chickpeas. And as you can see, I've been using these for a long time. And these are just normal dried chickpeas that you can use, instead of using baking beans or fancy baking stones or wherever else they try to sell you to do this. I mean, who's got the money to pay for all of that? And this has baked at the bottom of the oven on an oven tray at 160 degrees Celsius fan setting. That's 320 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes. And we are pretty much fully baking this quiche base at this point, but we want to be gentle with it. We don't want to over bake it or darken it too much at this point. But we're going to put it back in the oven now for about 15 minutes to continue to dry out. And just keep an eye on it when it's in there the second time to make sure it doesn't puff up too much. And then we need to let that cool down fully. And when it's cooled fully, we're going to seal it, like I said earlier, with some beaten egg white. And this will make quadruply sure that our quiche base will not have a soggy bottom. And I would like to make a joke or a pun about soggy bottoms to lighten the mood, but even my terrible sense of humour won't stretch to such terrible innuendo. And that needs to go in the oven again for 7 to 8 minutes to set the egg white while we crack on. And I'm topping this quiche with mushrooms, just like the one I was obsessed with at the Rose Bakery. But as I'm using average supermarket standard mushrooms, rather than the fancy ones that the Rose Bakery used, I'm just going to slice them thinly to try and make them look halfway nice. And the quiche that really blew me away at the Rose Bakery was their sun-dried tomato and feta quiche, which I'm going to recreate here. So I'm going to chop 150 grams of sun-dried tomatoes, and the ones in oil work best. But as you can see, I've drained the oil off them, and now you can decide how big or small you want to chop these, because you're an independent and individual autonomous human, aren't you? And I like to stir these into the filling so any excess oil on these tomatoes can be distributed evenly rather than giving an oily texture when you eat it in the quiche. And here's our fully dried and fully set quiche base, and it's not square like at the Rose Bakery, but it does the job. They use square bottomless frames for their quiche, and I did consider trying to source some of those for this video, but when I saw the prices, my arse fell out, so I just went with what I had, you know. And I'm going straight onto the base of this quiche with 150 grams of crumbled feta cheese, and I find that this is the right amount. You may want to put more in, but it is easy to overdo it with cheese, especially with feta, so just watch what you're doing here is all I'm saying. And after a last quick stir of this here filling, we're almost home and hosed. So I'm just spooning the tomatoes in so they're evenly distributed and everyone gets a burst of that sun-dried flavour in every bite. And once I'm sure that they're democratically dispensed, I can pour in the remaining liquid of this mix. And the oven is already preheated at this point, 180 degrees Celsius with no fan on, and that's about 355 Fahrenheit. And I'm just putting these thinly chopped mushrooms on top of this here to make a lovely little pattern. Or you can just hide them on like a barbarian, if that's not offensive to barbarians. And we're going to bake this for about 50 minutes at the bottom of the oven. And while that's baking, let's dig in and have a close look at the legendary square quiche from the Rose Bakery. And I am in my 3-star hotel here, and I've set up on a towel on the bed here, and it wasn't a very comfortable bed. And here is the broccoli and courgette quiche, and you can see that perfect dark pastry which really made these extra special. And trying to hold quiche in one hand and a camera in the other isn't the easiest thing, so apologies for the poor quality of the cinematography here. This one is ham and mushroom, and I did enjoy that one, but not as much as the feta and sun-dried tomato, and I also slept with the crumbs in the bed, So I was happy with that. Salmon and asparagus, well, the less said about that the better, because I don't like salmon or asparagus. The wife ate that one, and that made her smell even better than she usually does. But anyway, my quiche is ready now, and look at that. I'm really looking forward to this one. And I am definitely going to sprinkle some fresh parsley on it here to give it that extra touch of class. And that has come out looking lovely, if I'm honest. But I do like to leave the quiche to cool down for at least 30 minutes before diving in. And that allows it to firm up a little and be plated effectively. Just like that. And let's have a look at this pastry base close up to prove that I absolutely nailed this. And I was walking on air for the rest of the day after making this video, to be honest. And because I'm so proud of this quiche, I'm going to force it up on you a little bit more. And this tasted as good, if not better than it looked. And I ate a piece in bed so I could sleep with the crumbs in order to recreate my dirty weekend in Paris when I experienced quiche inspiration that I've just passed on to you free of charge and with no clean-up costs. Thanks for watching, you lot. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe now, will you? So until next time, ta-ra.